Welcome to the evening reception, which I wish that I could be at in person, because I know that I would love every minute of it, as I've loved every minute of going back to the story, and I hope I'll be soon back in Shelsley Beauchamp. The party was after I had begun to be interested, because it was at a funeral where I met a cousin that I'd never really, I think I'd hardly met before, who I knew had a whole lot of letters from Burne-Jones to our co-great-grandmother in his house. And so I suddenly said, how interesting to meet you. But he also felt very guilty, because he was also the cousin who sold off a whole lot of Burne-Jones paintings that he had given to my great-grandmother, our great-grandmother, and didn't tell any of the family, and they were all sold off through Sotheby's. And I mean, it was ages ago. I was young, and my uncle was very annoyed because he said he could have bought some. And so this man, who had been a very young man, and he'd only inherited them by mistake because his brother had been killed, and he was wanting to start a theatre company or something like that. And he thought, well, I'll sell off these paintings, hardly knowing what they were really. So he was, when he met me and I sort of cornered him like this, he said, I felt very bad about that. But the thing is, I've got lots of letters in my house. I mean, you can come and see them if you like. So off I went, and I got to this house, and big house in the country, and he obviously didn't, I mean, he never went into this library, and he said, they're in this chest, and I opened the drawers of the chest, and there were just these hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of letters, just higgledy-piggledy. And I was completely amazed. And I obviously had to come back. I mean, I could only see, I saw a few of them, and I thought, what is this? Because they seemed to me like passionate love letters. Anyway, I arranged to come back. But meanwhile, after that, I went to this party, and I'd known that my great-grandmother had adored her eldest daughter, Amy, and had been absolutely shattered when she died young, and that Burne-Jones had done a most wonderful portrait of her. And somebody said, well, that portrait is now owned by Andrew Lloyd Webber. Then, almost at the same time, I went to this party in a garden, and I'd never met Andrew Lloyd Webber at all. And I saw him across the garden. I sort of made a beeline for him. And he'd bought this painting not knowing who this girl was. She was just very, very beautiful, 19-year-old girl. Wonderful, all dressed in black, amazing portrait, very famous now. And I said, I think you've got a portrait of my great-aunt. And I'd really love to see it. And he sort of taken aback, said, who was she? And then he did say, oh, well, yes, you can come and see her, ring up my secretary, which is what I did, and which was how I went down and saw the portrait. And then I went back and saw more letters, and then I realised it was such an intriguing thing. And I went to a friend of mine who was the biographer, Victoria Glendinning, and I'd written cookery books, lots of them before then, but I'd never done research of this kind or written historical books. And I said to Victoria Glendinning, what shall I do? It's such an amazing story. And then she heard I'd all these letters that had never been seen in public before. And she said, this is gold dust, and what you've got is gold dust. You must write it. You can write fluently. Just write it. She said, it'll probably take you about 5 years, but it'll be 5 very happy years. And in fact, it was 3 very happy years, because I couldn't stop. I loved it so much. I was very soon absolutely bowled over by the passion in these letters, because I had no idea it was that kind of relationship, and also the wonderful language that Burne-Jones used. He wrote beautifully, like a stream of consciousness. He never used any punctuation, just amazing. And I mean, he used to have letters. He wrote so many letters every day, and he had the paper pinned up on his easel, and he just used to write whenever a thought came into his head. And then there was the paper boy who used to post his letters. There were 7 posts a day then. So, I mean, your letter got to whoever it was going to in London in about 2 or 3 hours. Nowadays, it's all done electronically, but not in quite such a romantic way. But the most extraordinary time that, I mean, I went over and over again to this house, and I took my great huge photocopier there, and used to photocopy these letters so that I could read them again properly at home. But what I couldn't take back was what I also found at the back of one of these drawers was an old sort of parcel, very old brown paper, very old string. And I thought, what can this be? And then I found a little label with my great-grandmother's writing, which I knew I knew her writing from albums and letters and things. And it said, paint brushes given to me or given to May Gaskell by Edward Burne-Jones. And it was for the portrait of Amy. And I opened this, and there were all these paint brushes, and some of them with bits of paint on them. I mean, it was quite extraordinary. And because I was sort of holding these things that Burne-Jones had held, and there was the paint. And I was all alone in this library, and with this cousin who didn't seem very interested at all. And I remember I knew the biographer Michael Holroyd. I rang him up and said, this extraordinary thing's happened, these paintbrushes. And he said, oh, lucky you. He said, that's exactly the best moment of biography, is when something happens like that. And he said, because you're literally touching the past. And it was wonderful. Well, I think the thing is about Burne-Jones, he really loved children, and he was wonderful at sort of he entered their world. He wrote as he knew they'd like him to write, and they took to him, and he formed this romantic relationship. I mean, he admired, loved, whatever you say, with their mother, and Daphne was the youngest one, and he took to her. And my grandfather, who was the middle boy, was actually very artistic. And Burne-Jones used to give him little drawing lessons too. But with Daphne, it was something very special because she was much younger. I think, I mean, the playfulness actually came in his own life too. I mean, he used to do these little drawings in letters to May. He would do these little drawings, which are absolutely charming. And he loved cats, and he loved the sort of warmth of cats. He loved warmth. He was getting on. He was in his 60s, which he thought was very, very old indeed. There was one charming drawing, which was him. Always he drew himself looking very, very pathetic. And he was lying back in a chair, and this enormous fluffy cat was sort of all taking up most of him. And underneath he just wrote, "How I like to be." I mean, I loved his humour and his wit. It was wonderful. Well, Love Among the Ruins was a terrible thing that happened, which was that actually, although it doesn't look like it at all, it was a watercolour, and it was being, I think, shown in Paris or something, and somebody they thought it was an oil, and they put, some restorer or whatever they were had put egg white over it to make it sort of glisten more. And it was a watercolour, and it completely ruined it. And so he was totally distraught. And May had asked him up to her house in Lancashire, at Beaumont Hall, and I think it was the first time he went afterwards as well. And he just suddenly decided he had to go and be comforted by her and get on a train, which was not going to be very comfortable, but he just went up there. And they had walks together. There's a sort of letter about walking up a green lane and all sorts of things. There's also quite a suggestive letter when one is wondering whether this relationship was platonic or not, was when he sort of fantasized about being under her skirts at breakfast. Well, that doesn't sound very platonic, but nobody will ever quite know how physical it became. It can't have been completely physical because they were both married and had children and had servants, and he was much older than her. Who knows? I mean, you know, romantic passion can be even more passionate than sexual passion. Quite late on in my researches, from letters to another friend of May's, who's Lord Milner, Alfred Milner, who, I mean, that was not a romantic friendship. It was just a very good friendship, and I discovered what I'd always wondered about was her May's marriage, and I discovered that it was an amazing discovery because I don't think anybody had ever seen these letters or anything. That it was very unhappy, and she intimated that she was bullied terribly by him and was very, very unhappy a lot of the time. And I think that she also felt very dutiful to her marriage and her children, and she obviously had to try and make it continue and work. And so probably she couldn't sort of be, I mean, she did write him masses of letters, which unfortunately he burnt because he thought she'd burnt his, so that their relationship could remain, the title of my book, as he said, a profound secret. So he thought that she'd also burnt his letters. I think that she just felt she had to keep a certain distance from Burne-Jones sometimes. She was also busy. I mean, she was a very busy sort of social, intelligent woman in London, and with these different houses, and you know, she had a very full life. And he had a full life of painting and painting and painting. But while he was painting, of course, he was writing letters and thinking. My first visit was wonderful because I heard on Radio 4, I heard this woman talking about Great Whitley, which is where my great-great-grandfather David Melville, his sort of second rectorship before he moved. I mean, first at Shelsley Beauchamp, then Great Whitley, and then on to Worcester Cathedral. And he became a sort of honorary canon before then, and then a full canon. But I heard this woman talking about Great Whitley and talking about the church, and I sort of realised that she was a sort of local amateur historian or something, and that she would know, you know, she would know more. And I wanted to see Whitley Court, the extraordinary sort of ruin, and so we went there and made a date to meet Ruth Butler there. And there was this woman in complete sort of period clothes. I mean, it was sort of wonderful. I mean, I loved seeing her like that, and we became great friends. And I mean, I still hear from her today. She's also a great researcher, so she began sort of looking things up for me. And then at that same time, I think I found out where the rectory was. So we got in touch with the people who lived there, and I was able to go all the way around and identify David Melville's study. Yes, well, when I went to Hatfield College, which is where he went after Oxford, I was amazed because in the dining room there's this enormous portrait, much more than life size, of this very tall man. I mean, he was 6'2", David Melville, which in those days was enormous, and he was very handsome, and Denning, what was he called? Denning, who'd started the Dulwich Picture Gallery, and also was a good painter, painted David Melville, this wonderful, huge portrait. And they've got it at Hatfield College in the dining room. It dominates the whole room. And they still revere him there. And so I talked to them all about him, and they'd written histories and everything. And he sort of came alive properly to me. But and also it was explained to me how he'd been the person who'd made it possible for poor students to go to university and also to live in. I mean, I don't think before that there were universities where you could live in, and these poorer students could live in. So he was groundbreaking. He really was. I mean, I wish I could have met him. I might have been rather daunted by him, though. Well, quite separate from David Melville's sermons, I sort of searched for things that he himself had written about the past. It was quite difficult. But I found this description of when he first arrived at Shelsley Beauchamp, this tiny little picturesque village. And I'll just read what he said. It's quite evocative. It was a lovely but very primitive place. Letters came twice a week, generally in the hat of a carrier. The rector, who preceded me, spent his days at the side of the river with an old servant sitting by him to bait his hooks, but who always fell asleep when wanted. The church was a ruin, and everything else a memorial of better days. The one service on Sunday had a very limited congregation. Through the doorway in the tower, a bass and flageolet emerged and accompanied a hymn, seeking their retreat when the service was over with much cider. Among my earliest visitations was one to the dying representative of an old family who lived on his property, such as it was. He had a wretched life, never having been to church and neither able to read or write. He was a thorough reprobate. I found a circle of old women gathered round the corpse with clasped hands. So, they said, they might keep the devil from his sure prey. Towards the end of Burne-Jones's life, May herself was very often ill, and increasingly so, and he became very anxious about her, but he also felt, I think, that he was getting very old and ill. And in my book, I found this letter, which I think must definitely have been written almost at the end, from Burne-Jones to May, and it's the paragraph. The paragraph in this letter had been marked by May. It was obviously very, very special to her, and it was special to me too, because it's such an extraordinary letter. Anyway, here is the marked paragraph. You see, May, it is these things of the soul that are real, and the only real things in the universe, and the little hidden chamber in my heart where you only can come is more real than your little bedroom, if you can believe it. I will furnish it for you, with a couch for your tired soul to lie on, and music that shall be always soft and low, and little talks when you are refreshed, news of the outer world. When you are rested and can sit up and stand, I'll open a little magic window, and you shall choose what land you will see and what time in the world. You shall see Babylon being built, if you like, or the Greeks coming into Greece, or the North Sea tossing and full of ships, or the piety of ancient France, plaintive notes of ancient Ireland, kings of Samarkand, Nibelungen terrors. All I have raked, with greedy hands, into my treasure house since I was a mean, wretched-looking object of 10 until now. Into that room, with the magical window, none has entrance but you. Well, how would you feel if you had that letter? Isn't it amazing?